Thank you, Meryl. On behalf of North County Climate Change Alliance, I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's guest, Dr. Phil Watts. Dr. Phil studied aeronautical engineering at McGill University, Canada. He then earned his PhD in environmental engineering sciences from Caltech, probably one of the top 2 universities in North America. He worked as a research scientist for 10 years and published over 30 scientific papers in top peer-reviewed journals, internationally published. Dr. Watts worked as a consulting engineer, and he performed hazard assessments for the insurance, the oil and gas, along with nuclear industries. In 2012, he founded Resource Renewable Energy, a company that he formed in order to realize his incredible vision of customizing energy platforms in order to meet the community energy needs, not unlike that of our local utility, right? Not. So without spending a lot more time, which it would take to do true justice, I'll introduce Dr. Phil Watts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Phil. I'm going to just start screen sharing and launch into the presentation here. So hopefully this will start working properly. Here we go. So what I'm going to talk about today is going to be the energy situation in California. I'm going to talk about renewable energy in California as well, specifically. And then we're going to discuss some local projects and have a nice, beautiful conversation afterwards to see where things stand and how we view things. What I want to say about my bio is that our mission is to provide safe, clean, affordable energy to communities. And I think that's sort of at the heart of everything that we do. And that's going to be at the heart of this presentation, and I believe that's why I'm here and have something maybe to share with all of you. So the question is, how are we doing in California from the perspective of safe, clean, and affordable energy? And the first thing to say is that California has some of the best solar potential of the United States. That means this dark red region in the Southwest just means there's a lot of sunshine, a lot of solar power that's available. All it's really saying is that the weather is really good down here. We have more sunny days, we have less rain, and that's at the heart of why we have the ability to produce so much solar power. So the Mediterranean climate, if you will. With respect to different possible sources of energy, renewable energy won. At least it won the price battle. Solar and wind is currently half the price of natural gas, the closest hydrocarbon to them. And basically what I would say to you is follow the money. A lot of natural gas power plants in the country never got built. That says something. Investors are going to solar and wind just because they are the cheaper sources of energy right now. And so the idea that it won is not just won on the price, merits of price, but has won in the financial sector as well. And so if we stop and gather these two facts together, California has some of the best sunshine in the United States, and solar power is currently the cheapest source of electricity. You would think that we have the lowest prices of electricity right here in California. And since I can't hear you guys guffawing, I will assume you're all laughing in your seats. And so in reality, California has some of the most expensive electricity in the country. And it's currently more, at least in North County, San Diego, it's currently more than 27 cents per kilowatt hour. And for many of you, it's more than 30 or 35 cents per kilowatt hour. And this has to do partly with SDG&E, our friends here. And you are basically paying the same price for electricity or similar prices for electricity as Alaska and Hawaii, despite the fact that we're sitting on the golden state is literally golden with sunshine and low cost renewable energy. Part of this is due to the circumstances that we face right now. Hydropower has played a big role in the past as a source of renewable energy. The springtime melt of snow in the Sierra Nevadas, basically. And we're going through intermittent droughts, we're going through climate change, and the future of hydropower is quite uncertain. It's not clear what kind of contributions it will be able to make in the future. Also, as part of this sort of overall landscape, is nuclear power is either going or gone. I would like to say, as a sort of a technical person who did a lot of hazard assessment, that these particular designs for nuclear power plants were quite risky, far riskier than the industry was willing to admit. And so in some sense, it's good riddance, but then the other side of me wants to say that it is, in fact, as an engineer, I want to say it is possible to do safe and affordable nuclear power if one were to use different designs, maybe ceramic spheres or a can-do design or something like that. But I don't see any of that on the horizon. That doesn't seem to be something that people are using or heading towards. And so basically we can say nuclear is out of the picture. So why is it so expensive? Clearly something has to give. Clearly there's something interesting taking place here that needs to be explained, because the gap between what's possible and what you're actually paying is basically the largest in the country. And so here is the sketch of the system that we are using currently for solar power. And what I want to say about this is, if we just start walking through this, generation currently is around 3 cents a kilowatt hour, roughly. It's actually less than that for some places, but let's just run with 3 cents here amongst friends. Keep it a simple number. Transmission for SDG&E is charged at around 12 cents a kilowatt hour, and that's fixed by the CPUC. Distribution is running at around 4 cents a kilowatt hour. That's also fixed by the CPUC, or the California Public Utility Commission. What they don't say, and what's really interesting, is around half of the electricity, this is in California specifically, we have a very inefficient transmission system, and around half of the electricity is lost. Not due to the transmission wires that you see here, but due to the substations. The substations, there's so much equipment in a substation that as the electricity comes down from one transmission wire, goes through the substation, it gets different inbound transmission wires get put together, and then it gets mixed, and then it goes to various outbound transmission wires, and you have so many different pieces of equipment, switches and dynamic variable variants, so many different technical things that they all have they all eat up a certain amount of electricity. So every time the power goes through a substation, you lose a chunk of it. And that's quite salient to explain that there is in fact an extra 2 cents a kilowatt hour or so due to these kinds of overall losses. That's actually substantial for the overall view of what's going on here. And then fees and taxes make up the rest of it. So you end up with a 30-cent plus pie, of which only 3 cents is the generation, and the rest is due to transmission, distribution, losses, and then the fees and taxes. So what can we do? Well, let's consider a few options. Let's look at some of the different things that are available. And so we can ask ourselves if we should build more solar power out in the desert and have more transmission lines. I would suggest that maybe, just maybe, we want fewer transmission lines or upgrade the current system because we want less wildfires and we want less blackouts. And some people will say that more transmission lines will solve the problem, but I'm not sure that that's the case, because once you build more transmission lines, people will try to build more solar generating facilities out in the desert, and they'll just max out just like the current system, and we'll have more sparks, so to speak, to cause wildfires. So I think the view of transmission, especially at 12 cents a kilowatt hour, is that it's intrinsically expensive, but it's also intrinsically hazardous. And that hazard is not going to go away or get less without something substantial changing. Some people have talked about microgrids. I love microgrids. It's part of what I do for a living. But I think what you need to know is that microgrids often serve a special purpose, and they're really great for special locations, but you need a lot of extra equipment to be able to disconnect from the grid or to be able to run off grid when the grid goes down and to keep running smoothly. And all of that extra equipment comes with extra costs. And I don't think microgrids is the answer for cities specifically. It can be an answer for a whole lot of different entities, but I don't think that's quite the right solution for a city. Other people talk about the smart grid, and there is a lot of efficiency that's available here, a lot of lower cost electricity and better, more efficient uses of electricity. I want to accept that and own that and say that it's completely true, but I'm not sure that you and I want our laundry to be dictated by a utility, or the fact whether or not our toaster works to be dictated by the utility, or whether or not our car has been charged and is ready to be used to be dictated by the utility. So while some of the smart grid is inevitable, and while many entities and folks and business people will welcome it, I'm not sure that it's the solution for consumers, for you and I when we live at home. So let's then discuss community power. And let's discuss not just community power, but how to bring power to communities. So what would that look like if we brought power to communities, or if we implemented community power? And so this is the view that I showed you for the utility scale projects. And I think, in some sense, these projects are a big deal. They're often hundreds of millions of dollars. They're several hundred miles away from the cities. And, these are funded by Wall Street, and SDG&E will contract for the power, and it goes to the California Public Utility Commission, and they approve not only the project and the power and the transmission lines, but they approve the 12 cent per kilowatt hour charge as well, that all of you pay, or at least that those of you who are in North County, San Diego, pay in the SDG&E system. And so the view that I want to say here, not to be too coy, but that these projects, these transmission lines, these prices are all basically being decided in back rooms of some sort, figuratively, if not literally, probably in and around Sacramento, probably by a bunch of white guys, and potentially over whiskey and cigars. And that's, I think, a fair representation of where we're actually at. Community power is a little bit different. Community power would be close to you. It would be a few miles down the road. It would be only slightly smaller in size, but it would be next door. It would be safer, and it would be more affordable. Basically, we are getting rid of the transmission and the transmission costs and the losses associated with all of those substations. And so we wind up with a much lower cost of energy being delivered to your home. Basically, we are looking at 14 cents lower than the current projects out in the desert. And it's important to say that when they talk about projects out in the desert, they'll talk about the 3 cents per kilowatt hour generation. Well, it's the same for the community projects. It's around 3 cents per kilowatt hour for generation. So there's no difference there in the generation price. The difference is in the transmission prices and the transmission losses. Now, in reality, however, politics gets in the way, and the California Public Utility Commission forces us to pay the 12 cents for the transmission system anyway. So we still have a 2% savings for energy losses. And then San Diego Gas and Electric, in their infinite wisdom, asked the Public Utility Commission to do a 4-cent surcharge on California choice aggregators, namely in North San Diego, the Clean Coalition. And so San Diego Gas and Electric basically has asked the CPUC successfully to offset the 2-cent savings that we would have. So simply, there's no way to avoid the California Public Utility Commission. There's no way to avoid the politics of the situation. There's no way to avoid the influence of San Diego Gas and Electric. But you guys would be paying 7 cents a kilowatt hour instead of 21 cents, savings of 14 cents if the politics weren't getting in the way. The other alternative is for those who are rugged individualists is to put rooftop solar. It's not for everybody. There can be a big upfront cost for certain implementations for certain people, but it's a great solution, and it's a solution that's on your own property. It's behind the meter. And if you notice, there's no fees and taxes associated with it. Although I got to point out that the CPUC is considering imposing additional fees and taxes on rooftop solar because it's simply too good for those who can actually implement it. It's an excellent bargain to lower your energy prices. So if we look at the overall picture and summarize what we just saw, the mix of solar power is, I believe, where the solution lies. And that is to say that there is definitely a role to play for large utility scale solar projects out in the desert. There's definitely a role for transmission lines. But I would like to reduce the transmission load by implementing 30%. I suggest that this is a much better solution. And then there's certainly plenty of studies to back this up and say that this is a much lower cost solution for the ratepayers, for you. Is if 30% or so of the power were to be generated in the community proper and be only 1 to 3 miles away from the end user, get put on the distribution system and go straight to the end user, go straight to your home. Now, the rooftop solution is on your own property. It sounds great, but there are limitations. The reason why it's only 10% of the mix or so or thereabouts is because of just circumstance, simply put, that sometimes houses are renters live in houses, and so the people paying the owner and the people paying the electricity bill are two different people. Sometimes there are trees, sometimes the orientation of the roof isn't favorable to solar panels, sometimes it's an old roof. And so there's just practical limitations to how much solar power can be put on rooftops. And it's a bit of a tragedy, if you will, but it's just a very pragmatic real world limitation to how much power we can get from our own residences. So what would it look like to implement community power in North San Diego County? And one of the prime examples here is Maerkle Reservoir. Maerkle Reservoir is the tan blob, if you will, on the bottom of this image. But just above Maerkle Reservoir to the north is this patch of land, and it's a green polygon here, but I gotta say the actual land is brown where they cut the grass. And it's about 55 acres of empty field. And it's in the northeast corner of the city of Carlsbad. And this is a region, this green polygon here has been identified by the city of Carlsbad in its climate action plan as a potential site for solar power. I have it from various sources in the city that they may be moving towards putting solar power on this site in the next year or two. So part of this talk is to talk about, well, what does that look like and what are the benefits? Sort of think about everybody, think about this, get used to it, discuss this as a site for solar power for the city of Carlsbad. Now, what does the actual project look like? This is one possible implementation of the project. This is a whole lot of south-facing solar panels, ground-mounted. It's roughly 20 megawatts of solar power with roughly 20 megawatts of battery storage. The battery storage is a big part of the project. It's part of what makes this so beneficial to the community. It adds resiliency to the local grid, and so that's a wonderful benefit and something that the Clean Energy Alliance would presumably welcome. And it would power around 3,000 homes. And depending on how you look at it, it would provide roughly 5% of the city of Carlsbad's total energy consumption. So, so this is a big deal. I mean, 5% generated locally is, I believe, a big deal. 3,000 homes is a significant chunk of the number of homes in the city of Carlsbad. And the project itself, the 20 megawatts of solar power, is large enough to achieve the economies of scale that you expect and to hit the 3 cent per kilowatt hour target that's currently happening out in the desert. So we can expect all of the benefits to happen here. So specifically, here are, a list of some of these benefits. Presumably, potentially lower electricity prices, much lower if the politics gets out of the way. But I have to say to you right up front that SDG&E is planning to increase its energy prices over the next few years substantially. And whereas with beneficial politics or with local projects such as Maerkle Reservoir, the CCA, the Clean Energy Alliance for North San Diego County, can either keep energy prices the same or lower energy prices. And so these types of projects make that possible for the Clean Energy Alliance, these local community power projects. Also, there's less use of transmission lines, which makes these projects help improve the safety of the transmission system. It helps improve the resiliency of the local energy supply, and it makes North San Diego County more self-reliant. There are significant economic development benefits. $60 million is not a small dollar amount. There are also multiples when these kinds of projects are installed in a city. The same dollars circulate 2 or 3 times within the city. And so you're looking at substantial benefits to the city economy from this project, as well as a variety of jobs, construction and long-term to manage the project. The city of Carlsbad also would potentially make revenue from this project because it would be on city land. And so they would be paid a land lease. And I want to just tell you right up front that that dollar amount would be larger than, or presumably, probably larger than what they would make from developing real estate on this land. And so it turns out that renewable energy is a better investment for a city in terms of city revenue than real estate development is. And that's a wonderful new opportunity for the city to realize. There are other opportunities nearby for community power. So for example, Maerkle Reservoir can be replicated. So there are 2 to 3 potential solar projects here at the Del Mar Fairgrounds. You can't put solar power throughout the entire parking lot. You can't put solar power on all the roofs, but you sure as heck can pick and choose different locations for a whole lot of solar power to benefit the nearby communities. And this is the reason why that 30% of power is in fact available to power the local communities, because there are sites such as the Del Mar Fairgrounds. And so community power not only can, but will provide safe, clean, and affordable energy for North San Diego County residents. I want to finish by saying something about resource renewable energy. Because we are dedicated to all these different types of projects that you see here. They all have something in common, which is they are all dedicated to the middle ground between utility scale projects and rooftop solar projects. And so we really believe that the middle ground is where the future is for renewable energy, where many of the gains to reach 100% renewable energy will be achieved, and where the solutions are flexible enough and low cost enough to be of benefit to customers such as yourselves. So that concludes my talk, and I will stop sharing my screen and welcome questions.
Thanks, Phil. That was great. And you covered a lot, and I'm glad to see you break down those costs, because everyone gets confused trying to read their power bill. And you could read it 3 months in a row and it reads differently, which is frustrating as hell for anyone that's tried. So I appreciate you showing that with graphics. That's very helpful.
I just have to
Um,
point out that they have roughly, they have websites with something like 80 different tariffs on the SDG&E website. And so you can go and scroll through them and open up each one of the PDF files and amuse yourself to try and figure out what they're actually telling you.
yeah, it sounds like it's a lot of purposeful obfuscation to make sure that people cannot really understand their bills and therefore don't really complain, kind of like the medical industry.
Yeah, and I say that too, though, because I had to sort of give whole numbers and round things off and simplify things a little bit. But those are roughly the correct numbers. Yeah.
So first question here is from Eric, who asked, do we get any of our energy from the wind turbines in Palm Desert?
Absolutely. I do not know. I would presume, since they've been around for so long, that that power has been contracted already. And so the Clean Energy Alliance, being the local CCA for Carlsbad, Del Mar, Solana Beach, and up and coming Oceanside and Vista, I believe, they may not be able to contract for that power. It might already be um, bought up by various other players. So that's partly why. And the other thing too, I think, just to point that out, is that these are often large facilities with very large contracts for which the Clean Energy Alliance is the little player coming to the table. And it's a lot easier, I believe, for the Clean Energy Alliance to digest a local project that's designed for them than perhaps to try and elbow their way into the big energy projects and try and get a piece of them. So, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
next quick. Go ahead,
sorry.
Phil, sorry.
No, I have a question that I'd like to ask. What about, could the public municipalities and cities, or even the county, could they put these projects together just as easily as some type of independent company like you're suggesting?
Typically, this can vary, but typically cities don't have the kind of expertise to develop these projects themselves. They can hire companies to do feasibility studies. They may or may not get good advice. I've found what has a developer like myself or our company, just to try and understand where are the guarantees in this. The guarantee is usually the people putting up the $60 million, because people don't put up $60 million for projects without going through them with a fine-tooth comb with extraordinary diligence. And so the banks and the equity owners and the private equity people, while it's strange to talk about them in an environmental community, they have such expertise about the cost of these projects, and they go through what we do with such a fine-tooth comb that I really think they're the real backstop for quality here. And they're the really sophisticated players. And I think it's beneficial to work with companies that interact with them and can be like the liaison both ways to the city, understanding the city and creating projects that serve the actual needs of the city, lower the electricity prices for the actual consumers in the city, but who can also turn around and interact with those financial types and be able to guarantee a great price.
Thanks.
Jim asks, why do government regulators allow utilities to make home solar so difficult to acquire and install? Specifically, I'm referring to limits on production and no payment for excess production.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think if you have the ability to put solar power on your roof, you should do it. It will almost certainly lower your electricity bill. It'll almost certainly do some good for the planet. Not everybody's in a position to do that, but it is by far the best thing to do. And I think they just don't. I think it's fair to say that the politics of the situation is they do not want people to be implementing that as widely as they can. It's the same for big box stores. It's the same for certain parking structures and parking lots and other commercial places where you can put up solar panels and do behind the meter on the property, and you can do an enormous amount of good. lower electricity prices, and it's just a fantastic solution if it's available. It's the best solution, I believe, that anybody can do if they have the resources to do it.
Okay, this question is from me. Reading through the county's regional decarbonization framework, which came out last week, it suggests that most of our new solar should be sited in the desert, based mostly on levelized cost of energy of desert installations. And they say that they can track with ground mounts, so they're assuming that they'll get the best efficiency out of the panels. You've shown that there are costs with transmission and losses from substations. But don't we also have to consider that desert solar is for profit and rooftop is not profiting investors?
You know, from what I've seen, if you look at desert solar, what we're proposing, community power and rooftop, I don't think the for-profit is necessarily the thing that makes the difference. The community power would be for-profit. It would presumably be third-party owned, although Carlsbad is a wealthy enough city to own it itself. But currently the interest rates and the financing is available, the money's available. It's relatively cheap to finance these projects. I don't think that's the determining factor. I think what you really need to pay attention to is when they talk about energy out in the desert, they're going to cherry pick what they want to talk about. So they're going to say, oh, energy out in the desert costs 2.5 cents to make. They're going to leave out the transmission and substation losses. They're going to leave out the fact that there are no transmission lines to carry the power from the desert. Let me say that again. There are no available transmission lines to carry the power from the desert right now. So what they're really saying is they're probably going to have to build a new transmission line to bring that power from the desert to the city, which means that you're going to be paying for that extra 12 cents per kilowatt hour, and they're going to leave that out. They're going to say, hey, it's 2.5 cents out there in the desert. They're not going to say it's 2.5 cents plus 2 cents of losses plus 12 cents of transmission. And so they're basically cherry picking and not looking at the total overall picture and the total benefit to the consumer, basically.
Okay, next question is the cost of solar generated electricity significantly different for systems using concentrated solar power versus photovoltaic solar? Yeah. Also, doesn't the use of heliostats significantly mitigate the cost of electricity production?
Typically, the thermal solar solutions, like you mentioned, are more expensive. And so we're familiar, I guess, with Ivanpah out in the desert, and they had some significant troubles, and their costs of energy were quite high. And so I think part of what is attractive about photovoltaics is that it's been fairly stable. The prices have been dropping regularly. Its performance is very well known and understood. It's very bankable. It's relatively easy to install. And so I think it has a lot of upside, a lot of benefits. And some of these thermal solutions are interesting, but they haven't reached the economies of scale and the lower prices that are associated with photovoltaic. Yet they could, but they aren't there yet.
What about the role of the community choice energy groups recently formed? Is it their responsibility to look towards building some of these renewable energy facilities, or is it really up to the local municipalities? And depending on which answer, what should the citizens like us do to push this idea forward? Because it seems like even though we have CCE recently formed, it doesn't seem like there's any momentum. It seems like everything is just status quo with nothing on the horizon. I have heard of no visionary assertions by San Diego's community energy group, nor of the recently formed North County. It's almost like we formed, we're doing it, but there's nothing going on really to enhance our situation.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. I think, if you think about it from the perspective, like that list that I mentioned of all the benefits, the local benefits, the economic benefits, the jobs, the benefits to the city, the benefits to the consumer, the lower prices, the energy resiliency, and all of that, that deserves to be replicated on a big scale by I would say every CCA in California. And there are cities that are implementing this right now. We're working with some of them. I'm not going to go into details here. Certainly the city of Carlsbad and the Clean Energy Alliance are aware of Maerkle Reservoir. That I'm certain of. And they understand the benefits. That I also am certain of. And so I'm hopeful that it's inbound sooner rather than later. I do believe that we need to talk about it. I do believe we need to understand it. I do believe we need to get people to, contact their city council and support it. But I would just, Phil, you and I haven't really talked about this, but all that much. But I really think the real action is at the California Public Utilities Commission, and that's where I believe, the bigger effort needs to be mounted, or the bigger focus needs to be had. Yes, we need to talk to City of Carlsbad and to the Clean Energy Alliance, but I think that's where the real power politics is happening. That's where the consumers are actually getting shafted in the worst possible way. Yeah.
So speaking of shafted, would you like to take a moment to describe what the PCIA charges?
Thanks for asking. I don't even know how to describe the PCIA. I'm at a loss for words. It's just this extra charge that San Diego Gas and Electric managed to get the CPUC to stick onto the local community choice aggregators within the SDG&E territory. And it basically offsets the transmission losses and the losses from transmission and substations, which then makes the power for the CCAs more expensive. And it's just beyond me. I'm at a complete loss for words.
So I've actually heard it described as it's a fee that's being charged, like you said, to the CCAs and ultimately passed on to their customers, making the CCAs not much cheaper than SDG&E at this point. But the reason that I've heard that fee exists and why it eventually peters out is because there were promises made and contracts signed by SDG&E for power. And as the customers get pulled away from SDG&E and to the CCAs, what SDG&E wanted was some remuneration from the fact that they had contracted for power that they'd no longer be able to deliver and use. And so they wanted like their money back.
There is a room full of lawyers who came up with that explanation. That I gotta say there is some validity to that. They probably entered into some contracts that were overpriced or are currently overpriced. And so they want to have some kind of, but that's usually built into the fee structure. That's built into the generation costs because they charge 9 cents for the generation. So the old generation, 9 cents made sense. The current generation is 3 cents, but they're still charging the consumers 9 cents for generation. And so if they're charging the consumer 9 cents for generation, you've got to wonder why they need an extra charge to make up for their generation contracts. And so in the end, that argument actually doesn't make sense, especially since the current contracts are so cheap that they're going to make such a profit charging you 9 cents a kilowatt hour for generation, but buying it for 2.5 cents. They're going to make such a big profit now that they could easily offset the losses that they might have from having bought it for 12 cents and charging you 9 cents. And so it just doesn't hold water in the long term. By the way, if I can just take up a role here, I see a couple of questions I just wanted to address real quick. Somebody said they can't find Maerkle Reservoir on Google Maps. And it's true, actually, you can't. It's there in the northeast corner of the city of Carlsbad. It's hard to find. It doesn't really stick out. I don't think there are very, very many markers in Google Maps for it. I just want to say that. The other thing is somebody just asked, are CCAs simply shuffling the same renewable resources that the IOUs have been purchasing? The answer is yes, unless we do community power projects. Unless we introduce, local projects that are actually less expensive and provide economic development and jobs for the local communities. Those are the new resources and the new paradigm And those are a way to benefit the community because the investment is in the community that's using the power. So the investment and the jobs are happening in the same community as the consumers. And that's the shift that we're implementing. And that's the shift that I believe puts the power in the communities. It makes community power for the communities, literally.
Yeah, and the other thing that's removed is, at least for the procurement part, that's 25% of what you're paying for. That part is nonprofit through the CCA versus the IOU can always try to negotiate as much profit as possible through the CPUC. Okay, I've got a kind of weird one here, but you mentioned when you showed the picture of the Del Mar Fairgrounds, you mentioned parking structures and there is some possibilities there, and we certainly see it with some businesses. Schools seem to have thought that was a great way to build out the solar for their space. What do you think about the concept of a pipeline of solar parking structures that we just come up with a long stream of plans and find ways for the consumers to invest in that solar through the CCA? So we can start building out a ton of solar on our parking spaces. If it's about managing, getting developers money, having those developers profit over the long term, we're still leaving the consumers out to not profit over the long term from this solar. So it'd be wonderful to give them opportunities to invest in the solar.
It's interesting that there are many ways to package solar power and community. In fact, one of the more interesting solutions, plausible solutions, although I'm not sure this has been discussed at length, is to implement a program where the Clean Energy Alliance would help finance behind the meter solar and storage, because that is by far the lowest cost electricity that anybody can achieve, because as of right now, San Diego Gas and Electric and the CPUC aren't reaching across the meter to impose extra fees and charges. And so any power that's behind the meter on the property is just a fantastic savings for whoever's on the property, or if it's done on a community scale, for the community as a whole. And so I think there are lots of more innovative ways to both produce power. But I think part of the talk, though, is to realize that all of these different scales are part of the solution. Everybody has a role to play. And we can try to bump up the rooftop percentages if we can. But either way, all of these different scales have an important role to play.
Yeah, we hear a lot of talk about infill, and let's try to keep the open spaces open and natural. And I really appreciate your argument about the transmission lines themselves will sort of always make those more difficult projects. But I really like the idea that we've got a lot of asphalt that's causing these heat desert island anyway, and it'd be really nice to take advantage of that, even though not everyone wants to look at a million solar panels over top of parking structures. That may be necessary.
Well, there's also ways to make it look pretty. LED lights are pretty cheap and available, and we can turn everything into a rainbow light show if we wanted to. So, partly facetious, but partly real. So we can do things and get creative.
What about, you referred to applying pressure, grassroots pressure towards the CPUC, but the history, just reviewing the last 10 years, is that they have all the power and they're joined tightly to the IOUs. So would it be more realistic in terms of getting real traction to have some sort of California citizens initiative? Because otherwise, everything I've heard in terms of even proposals by the CPUC, which are floated presumably for the public interest, the utility has already leveraged their position and they're gearing up to crush out those ecologically and distributed energy friendly systems. And so we don't really have what we should have, which is democratic input the decisions are made through the monopoly system. And we just have to recognize that and move forward with a statewide initiative where we would then have the true power.
You know, there's several perspectives here. So one is that the CPUC will just see the light, that there'll be enough public outrage and outcries over several different issues. By the way, there's more than one issue in front of them. There's resource adequacy. There are other issues that impact these projects, impact you and I, impact consumers. And so, there's also what else is there? There's a legislative solution straight from the California legislature. There's a potential initiative, public initiative solution as well. And there's just I think the CCAs are also getting more and more powerful because there's more and more cities that are signed up, and so as a group, they're starting to have some collective clout as well. So I think there's certain. I mean, I would like to say and believe that we're watching the sort of the last throes of the last bit of the IOU's power in the system, and that they're basically on their way out of the picture. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know exactly what role they're going to play. We could see the transmission grid double in size, or we can see the transmission grid simply stay the way it is. We can see the IOUs be responsible for transmission grids and distribution grids and hold steady in that position, or we can see vulture private equity come in and buy the distribution grids from them. So I have no idea where the long-term solution goes, but I do believe and expect that there will be some rapid financial movement over the next 5 years.
Interesting.
Kathy is asking the question, would you agree that a big advantage of behind the meter solar plus storage compared to community solar is energy resilience and energy independence? When the grid goes down, I assume that the grid connected community solar and plus storage system has to go down too, but that's not the case for the behind the meter solar plus storage microgrid / nanogrid.
Yeah, that's almost that's a great question, and it's almost true. The thing is that our presence, the presence of community power, makes it far less likely that the grid's going to go down in the first place. That's the key realization right there. Part of the reason why the grid's going down and the wildfires are being created, part of it is because the transmission system is just maxed out, and that makes it lose more energy. It makes it run hotter. It makes it sag closer to the trees. It's just basically a bad story. And by taking some of the pressure off the transmission system, without adding extra transmission lines, community power then makes the system safer overall without adding the additional cost of new transmission lines, and makes it far less likely that we'll have wildfires in the future. And so it's actually, it's kind of it's a very subtle system in terms of, how it works, how it operates, and what the dangers are, and how to get rid of those dangers.
So the pricing of retail electricity and wholesale electricity here in San Diego is pretty mind-blowing. And doesn't the giant disparity make the net metering issue, which we're going to hear from our next guest, going to talk more about that, but doesn't it make that a more difficult situation to resolve? And is the retail versus wholesale disparity similar outside of California?
I don't know that there's too many other states that have this kind of time of use charges and deregulated energy market that functions the way California does. We also have a unique situation in terms of sun out in the desert and large cities along the coastline, and that's part of the reason why our grid is so inefficient and why we have so many transmission and substation losses. And so we are really in a category unto ourselves. And I think part of the reason why I'm sort of suggesting, I'm not saying in this talk that community power is the solution or the only solution. I'm saying that, rooftop community power and the existing out in the desert all have a role to play as part of the solutions. And even the IOUs are implementing battery storage, large battery storage places. There's a private one in Vista. That's part of the solution as well. And so whether it's behind the meter in your in your house or whether it's a large battery facility in Vista, these are all contributing to our resiliency overall. They're all part of the overall solution. So I don't want to sign up and be too in favor of any one thing. I think in aggregate, when you build out a system that has many different scales to it, you end up with something that's far more resilient in the aggregate and lower cost, both. But with respect to net metering, yes, by the way, net metering is a specific program in California, and it has specific size limitations, and it has specific rules, and it has specific benefits and prices associated with it. And so it is its own sort of animal. And sometimes when we talk about community power, we may include net metering or we may not include net metering. So for example, at the Del Mar Fairgrounds, they have their own electricity consumption. And so it actually makes sense for them to have some net metering component on their own property. Whereas Maerkle Reservoir does not have any consumption on the property. And so net metering doesn't quite fit as well. So there's a purpose for each one of these programs, and they serve different roles. And it takes a certain amount of sophistication to understand when to call upon these different programs for different sites, for different properties.
All right, I need some more questions here, folks. What else have you guys got?
Well, I'm sorry, I have one. There's been a lot of discussion and actual some implementation, I guess, on the East Coast and in Europe with wind energy that's deployed offshore. And I was wondering, do you foresee some of that happening off of coastal California from the northern to the southern boundaries?
Hard to tell. Very, very hard to tell. Certainly the political will is there. The money is there. But what happens, Phil, the reason why that's so hard to answer is because these huge wind turbines off the coastline are just sort of national priority type projects. They have sort of a national significance, and they're often part of the sort of the national energy policy. And so, and it's hard to tell where it's going to go. They take a long time to put in place. There's only 6 ships in the world that can install these large wind turbines. And so, and it's actually kind of expensive power, but the good news is it's right offshore. It goes straight to the cities. That's one of the attractions of it, but I'm not sure where that's going. I have no insight into that at all.
Okay.
So Phil, one of the things that I came across as I was trying to learn about the roles of the programs for the community choice energy groups, or CCAs, is there were they almost seem like pilot projects rather than an ongoing big portion of what they're up to, but they do have these programs, and some of them are what they call community solar farms. And this is where renters might invest in a set number of panels and call them their own as if it was their rooftop system. I'm wondering if you see a lot of opportunity for that here in San Diego. And I can tell you that our 2 CCAs are new enough that they're not well enough funded that they're ready to jump into this. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, because eventually we need to go there, I think.
That's a beautiful solution. It's a beautiful solution. And I come at it from sort of a larger project, 20 megawatts, $60 million, and I sort of look to the usual sources of equity and just say, hey, it's available, the rates are fine, it's sort of a source of cash and it works fine. But I think community buy-in, just like community gardens and other community facilities, is a beautiful and a wonderful solution. And it would be great if the CCAs would implement more of this. I agree with you that it's been viewed that there are a lot of pilot projects. There's also a conversation out there that community power is too expensive. And the only reason it's on par with the desert is because of the CPUC. So I think that's simply not true. I think community power is a much cheaper alternative than even rooftop solar, if the CPUC were to not include all of those extra charges. And so a lot of different solutions, a lot of beautiful solutions. Absolutely.
Darlene asked, will the CCAs have access to matching funds from our federal legislation, the BIF or the Build Back Better?
What was that again? Coming in?
Yeah. So will our CCAs have access to the matching funds from the new federal money, the infrastructure bill or the Build Back Better?
I do not know. I do not know. I think one of the things that I would like to see is, and this is partly why I believe the private sector has a role to play, is that we can bring a certain amount of technical and financial sophistication to how to manage the electricity. And I think, you know, if you've gone to a CCA meeting, they kind of struggle to sort through this stuff. And I think, and for good reason, I don't think most city council members sort of understand the ins and outs of renewable energies, and especially with all the complications that we're talking about and all the regulatory risk and everything else. And so I think it's it's good if we can have more people at the table and providing more insight and more suggestions and providing different ways of doing it. And again, I think it's all of the above is the solution. And so community-based projects, community-owned projects, third-party owned projects, city-owned projects, they're all part of the solution.
Elizabeth asks, why can HOAs make you pay a fee to install solar panels? They charge from $1 to $3 grand. They say it's for their attorneys' approvals and city fees, but you would think that solar companies installing it handles all that. She's wondering if that's
so there's some of that's legitimate and some of it's not. It's hard to tell, actually. So for example, a professional engineer who's going to stamp a plan for rooftop solar can charge anywhere between $500 or $1,000 for the stamp. Some even want $2,000, but they're too expensive. And roughly 40% of the rooftop solar price is marketing. Often it goes to marketing because they have to spend so much time knocking on doors or sending out ads and so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of questions about where's the money going to and what is it being used for and what's the real cost of putting rooftop solar. So some people estimate the real cost of rooftop solar is lower than 10 cents a kilowatt hour, but people are currently paying all in roughly 15 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's a fair question, and I think people can dig and discover that it only costs $500 for this, $500 for that, and that they're being overcharged. And I think that's actually likely to be true in a number of cases, sadly.
So I hate to interject here, but as the secretary, I need to make you all aware of the time. We're at 6:37, so I think we're going to have to change over to our next speaker now.
So I would like to take a chance to thank Dr. Phil for being here. He actually has to leave us because he's got another engagement. So Dr. Phil, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will get the recording out to you, and you did a wonderful job of explaining all this. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It's been an honor.
Don't go away, folks. We've had another speaker here. Please don't drop off. So I would like to introduce our next speaker. Dave Rosenfeld is the Executive Director of the Solar Rights Alliance. Dave has been a community organizer for over 20 years and believes people power is the best way to overcome special interests. Prior to joining Solar Rights Alliance, Dave led a successful statewide ballot measure campaign in Oregon to restore career technical education for high schoolers. Before that, he led a 40,000 member public interest organization that successfully worked to reduce health insurance premiums for consumers and combat government corruption. In addition to spending time with his wife and his 2 children, he enjoys running, backpacking, and studying science and philosophy. Welcome, Dave, and please show us your presentation. We'd love to hear from you.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
All right. Excellent. Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see you all. Thank you for joining this really informative program, and thanks to North County Climate Change Alliance for everything that you guys do to protect Mother Earth. So I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm going to start with a slide, a little deck, 20 minutes, just a flyover of what is going on with rooftop solar in California right now, the fight, some of the specifics about the fight, and how you can make sure that we keep rooftop solar growing in California. and stop this utility effort to kill it. So I'm going to share my screen. And give me a sec here. I'm going to do some fancy footwork. Good. And one more thing I'm going to do before I share my screen is I'm going to drop into the chat a link. Thank you, Marion, for putting that petition. If you want to get a sense of the coalition that I'm about to tell you a little bit about, what I've just put in the chat is a link to the latest list of folks that are in one way, shape, or form aligned with the Save California Solar campaign. Can everyone see my screen? Can I just get a thumbs up real quick? All right, fantastic. So we're going to talk about the campaign to Save California Solar. So what we are is a coalition of over 450 organizations and community leaders. We're aligned around the idea that we need to keep rooftop solar growing in California. We need to make it more equitable so that we can get solar into the hands of millions of middle and working class Californians in the coming years, and to get batteries into their hands as well, so that people get all the benefits of solar but force multiplied. I'm going to get into a little bit of what's going on. Just quickly about my organization. So my organization, the Solar Rights Alliance, is one of those 450 organizations. So I kind of wear two hats. I coordinate the campaign, and then I also run an organization. For what it's worth, we are the nonprofit association of California solar users. We believe you have the right to make energy from the sun without unreasonable interference by the utility. We're a new organization. We started in early 2018. We've got about 50,000 people on our list. Most of the people on our list are people who have solar. There's also people that support solar or might want it one day. Our board of directors is just, regular schmucks like you and I who have solar. I'm the one and only paid staff person. Everything else is volunteer run. You can go to our website, check out videos of trying to figure out who the heck are we. Okay, so I already just told you all about what we're trying to do, and I need to update that because it's now 450 organizations. We're trying to keep rooftop solar and battery storage growing and grow it more equitably. And net metering is the foundation of all of this stuff. Everything else that we want to do with behind the meter solar is built on top of net metering. That includes community solar, which we just talked about earlier, yada, yada, yada. I love this photo because it's an example of what we're going for. Back in the olden days, 15 years ago, there wasn't very much solar, about 20,000 solar installations total. That was on the eve of the Million Solar Roofs initiative that was launched by Governor Schwarzenegger and the legislature. Today, there are 1.2 million solar rooftop systems in the state of California. And we are now at the point where just under half of all new solar going in is going into working and middle class neighborhoods. An increasing amount is going into multifamily homes and benefiting renters. This is an affordable housing development. And while most solar, residential solar, is going still onto single family homes, a growing number, rapidly growing number, is going into multifamily homes. And this is the future. We just kind of go 1.2 million. What a tremendous accomplishment in the last 15 years. But in the next 10 years, try to imagine millions of solar rooftops, and where it is absolutely accessible to working class communities, to renters. That's where we're going. And this development to me is kind of like, that's the next phase, is like more of this, and this is the kind of future that we're going towards. I don't really need to sell this crowd on like, why do we need more rooftop solar? But I think it is important to just kind of like itemize a couple of things because we're in a fight. And so it's just good to get clear about like, why are we trying to do what we're doing? The first is obviously just the street level, kitchen table. People should have more control over their energy bills. We now have a technology. Humans have been harnessing the sun since humans, were around. This latest iteration of humanity, we have this cool technology that allows us to be able to actually power our homes and our businesses, whatever. So we're almost in a position where people should not have to ever again choose between paying their utility bill and buying groceries. So that's kind of thing number one. Then there's blackouts. So long as we are somewhat reliant, and we will be for the foreseeable future, we will have to be reliant, so long as we're reliant to some degree on long distance power lines to bring in energy from far away, then we are going to experience rolling blackouts every year because of a warming planet, threats to wildfire threats and all that kind of stuff. The only solution that we can do at scale that is going to protect both individual households and entire communities from large scale rolling blackouts is local solar paired with a battery. It's the only way. There's no other good way to do it. And what's cool about it is once you've got a critical mass of solar and battery systems in a given neighborhood or a community or a town, you can stitch those together in ways with which the extra stored energy can benefit and keep the lights on for those who don't have solar, even if the larger grid is down. And so that's the second reason why we need to keep rooftop solar growing, to get to that critical mass. It doesn't have to be everybody, but it has to be more than what we have today. Third is, I think, the reason that this group has come together under the tent, which is climate change. The state has said we have to triple all wind and solar in order to hit 100% clean energy, no fossil fuels, and to electrify at the same time. We have to triple all wind and solar over the next 30 years. So think of every solar farm, every wind farm you've ever gone by, all the rooftop solar that you've driven by. We have to triple it in order to be able to do what we're doing. We have to do it as fast as we possibly can. So if you take rooftop solar off the table and you try to just do it with large scale alone, you're going to run into a lot of problems, because at some point very soon we're going to hit diminishing returns with large scale energy. We have to do it, and we can do it. But if you take rooftop solar off the table, those of us that care about open space preservation, Native American tribes and the turtles have something to say about what we're going to do there. And in any event, why are we screwing around? We got to get every clean electron we possibly can onto the grid as fast as we can. So that's another reason why we need more rooftop solar. And then finally is, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a second, is more rooftop solar plus battery storage saves every ratepayer money, whether they have solar or not. The reason why is because every time that you make energy at home using solar, you reduce your use of the long distance power lines that are the primary driving cost of the grid. And when you reduce your use of those long distance power lines, you reduce the wear and tear. And when you reduce the wear and tear, you reduce the maintenance. When you reduce the maintenance, you reduce the need to do new construction. And the latest and most detailed energy modeling that has ever been done in the United States about California has found that doing the clean energy transition with large scale renewables, but also a lot of rooftop solar and batteries, will save all ratepayers $120 billion, which is $300 per ratepayer per year for the next 30 years. So that's another reason, the fourth reason why we need more rooftop solar. It makes the clean energy transition cheaper for everybody. In 2018 alone, because of rooftop solar and energy efficiency, the state's grid operator scaled back or canceled over 20 massive power line projects that was going to get built and was going to get charged to ratepayers. They scaled it back or canceled it and saved $2.6 billion, $2.6 billion that was going to be charged to ratepayers that didn't, because they didn't need to build as many of them because of rooftop solar and energy efficiency. And that's just, so this is not a future projection kind of thing. This is a like happening now kind of thing. And so that's just an example. The utilities see it the other way. They want to double the cost, effectively double the cost of rooftop solar with two key things that they're proposing right now to Governor Newsom's administration at the CPUC. The first is to penalize people for putting solar panels on their roof. It depends on where you live and the size of your system, but on average, for example, if you're an SDG&E territory, then you would pay for putting solar panels on the roof an average of $91 a month, just for the pleasure of putting solar panels on your roof. That's the first. And schools, businesses, farms, bigger systems would pay more. That's the first part of the utility proposal. The second part is to slash the credit that solar users get for sharing their extra energy back to the grid. For those who don't know, this is called net metering. And it's basically when you have solar, you produce energy, and mostly you just use it, right? You just use it right there in real time. But when you make extra, which happens, that extra energy real time goes back out your meter, out the wires, and goes right into your community. And in real time, the utility sells that extra energy to your neighbors and then credits you at the same rate. A one-to-one swap. Makes sense. The utility didn't pay anything to make that energy. You did. And the utility pays very, very little to ship it around locally in your neighborhood. And you pay for that too, because a little bit is deducted off the credit you get for what we call non-bypassable charges. Between these two things, the penalty fee and the cut to the net metering credit, that effectively doubles the overall cost of going solar. And the way that gets represented is that the payback period goes from what it is today to about 5 to 8 years, and it becomes more like 20 years. No middle class or working class person will go solar under that kind of proposition, because a solar system only lasts 20 years. So what's the point of doing it? And that's what the utilities are trying to do. They're proposing this to the California Public Utilities Commission, which is a board of 5 appointees. They're appointed by a governor. Many of these folks you see here were appointed by Brown. They'll have terms that go up, and then Newsom will decide whether he wants to reappoint or appoint somebody else. So they serve fixed terms. Their process is not an easy one for regular people to follow. It operates more like a court of law than it does a legislature. What they're doing is they're in the middle of what's called a proceeding to revise the net metering program. This is the number of it and all that kind of thing. They are going to make their final decision sometime early next year. We're not exactly sure when, but sometime January, February. And they're going to make a proposed decision, not a final one, but a proposed one, sometime between early December and early January. So that's kind of the contours of the decision. However, and the campaign is very focused on trying to persuade the CPUC to reject the utility proposal and proposals like it. I'll talk about a few of those in a moment, and to embrace continuing to grow rooftop solar. And there are friendly proposals in front of them that would do just that. So that's the CPUC. But this is, I think, one of the most important things I want you to understand is while they are a decision maker, the key decision maker, whoops, let me go backwards. Really, the campaign is about Governor Newsom because CPUC commissioners are appointed by the governor. And the governor has a lot of goals: clean energy goals, electrification goals, open space preservation goals. Closing off rooftop solar to middle and working class families and effectively collapsing the market is not consistent with the things that he says that he's for. And while the governor doesn't have a direct veto or a say in CPUC decisions, it is absolutely the case that governors have the prerogative to weigh in and make their opinion known about what a decision ought to be when it either is consistent or conflicts with what the governor says their priorities are. He has not weighed in on this yet. Back in 2015, the last time we had this fight, Jerry Brown did indeed weigh in, and that was very important because the thing was going to go off the rails, and it is important that Governor Newsom do that. If he does, we have a chance of saving rooftop solar. If he doesn't, we might be kind of screwed. So that's kind of the two decision makers here and why they're important, what their formal and informal role is in the process. So what do the utilities say? The utilities say, for those of you out there that have solar, they say you are not paying your fair share of the grid. You have taken your ball and you have gone home. You're just making your own energy, nice hunky-dory for you, but you're not paying for the poles and the wires. And then on top of that, that extra energy that you send back to the grid, you're getting way overcompensated for it. We're paying you way too much for it. We could get that electricity much cheaper if we just bought it from large-scale solar and wind farms down out in the desert. And so this isn't fair because you're basically shifting the cost of the grid onto the people who don't have solar. And the people who don't have solar tend to be poorer than the people who do have solar. So this is actually exacerbating inequity and is the reason why people are paying out of their nose for electricity. And we have to bring that back into balance. That's what the utilities are saying. That's what they're spending oodles of money lobbying the government saying, and all kinds of other things. Now, they won't just say it outright. So they've set up a little front group that looks real nice, kind of green and orange, and kind of looks like they're one of us. And they've even got a little bit of a coalition, which we did a little bit of investigation and found that 2/3 of those folks in their coalition that they've listed take money from the utilities in the form of grants, and the rest are chambers of commerces around the state. So that's what they're saying. So you might go, well, is there any merit to it? Because that's a legitimate thing to ask. No, the answer is no, and I'm going to get into that in just a sec. This cartoon, I think, illustrates what really is going on, but let me give you more than a cartoon because we are intelligent people and we actually do want to talk about facts. The key thing to understand is the real reason why we are paying out of our nose in electricity prices is because of long distance power lines. There's a lot of cost to the grid, but the thing that has been the driver, the cost driver over the last 15, 20 years has been the long distance power lines. California is a big state. It's a geographically tricky state. And then California is just California. We've got a lot of weird history. So that's a big driver. Ratepayers this year are being charged $9 billion for the cost of long distance power lines. That includes both maintenance, construction, and wildfire mitigation, which is a new cost that's now popping up for obvious reasons. But the thing to really understand here is that long distance power lines is how the utilities make their money. That's their business model. They don't make a ton of money selling you the electricity. Where they make their money is on long distance power lines, because the deal that they have with the government is that they get to tack on an 8 to 10% profit on every dollar they spend building or maintaining power lines. And so, of course, it is in their interest to spend as much of your money and my money as possible building and maintaining long-distance power lines. And the CPUC and FERC and CAISO have not done the greatest of jobs keeping that spending in check. And so we now have kind of an out-of-control system where the costs just keep going up and up and up. So we now start to stabilize a little bit thanks to solar and efficiency, and because there's been more just public outrages, like why are my bills continuing to go up? But that's the business model. And then to go back to something I said earlier, rooftop solar is one of the few things, excuse me, that actually reduces the cost of long distance power lines. It reduces the need for them, because when you make your own energy at home or at your business, you don't use those long distance power lines as much, and it reduces the need to do maintenance and new construction, which cuts into utility profits. It doesn't take utility profits off the table, which is what's crazy, but it does reduce it. And the utilities don't like that, because for 150 years, they have had total domination over the system. They have loved being a monopoly. And now we're starting to erode that. And instead of sharing the table, they want to basically burn your part of the table down. This is who benefits from net metering, just to be really, really clear. I want to just take on the utility fake equity argument. This is a native tribe. Their bills before this were in the $80 to $100 a month range. And now the solar system that they have is $5 a month. And by the way, this is a really poor tribe. So you notice here, this is senior elder housing, no landscaping. They actually chose to do the solar instead of the landscaping because it was a real value proposition for the inhabitants of these residents. This is senior citizen affordable housing in Arcata. This is a farm worker family housing. You can't see the solar, but I swear to you it's there, that has the solar on it. The public is with us. That's the good news. We did a poll, and this is consistent with every other poll that's been done in the last decade. Overwhelming numbers of people want the state to keep encouraging people to have rooftop solar. It's one of the most popular parts of the clean energy agenda, and it cuts across every possible ideology that you can think of. I see this firsthand with the Solar Rights Alliance. I get on the phone every day with solar users who call us, and out of 10 people, it's every single politics you can possibly think of that's coming forward. The people do it for different reasons. It's awesome. And then, of course, we have that coalition on top of just the general public. So our goal is let's get solar and batteries to millions of Californians. We can grow it more equitably. We can get batteries in people's hands. We can do all kinds of great things for people. And then that's the way that we can then protect the planet and do our part as a society to pay it forward for future generations with respect to climate change, open space, and all the things that we think are really important. So then just lastly, it's a little stuck here, so just bear with. So we're running a campaign to basically make that so. And people might have seen last week, we had activists put a 300-foot-long message in the sand. We are doing everything we can to get in the face of the governor. This is a big state. It's a complex state. This is a governor that's not easy to access. So we're doing everything we can to get his attention. I'm sorry, I just want to show you some of these photos to give you a sense of the campaign. And I'll just bail out if for some reason we're just not working. Here we go. So we've done rallies at the Capitol. We've done press conferences across the state. We have, I see why the photos are just taking a while to load. Sorry, guys. We'll get through this. We're organizing visibility events, petitioning events across the state. We did a protest in front of PG&E's headquarters last week. Obviously, I told you about the beach action. And so the thing we're focused on right now is we want to deliver over 100,000 public comments to Governor Newsom and the CPUC on December 8th. We picked that date because that's going to be before the CPUC issues their proposed decision. And we want to make it really clear to the governor where the public stands. So this is a place where you can go and sign the petition. Your organization can do it. Some organizations are just hosting a similarly worded public comment tool on their own website. And if that's what you guys want to do, we can help you do it. So it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to say all the same thing. It just has to generally be the thrust. But if you want to just keep it simple, sign the petition and share the hell out of it. We have about 85,000, last I checked, folks who have submitted a public comment. We're 15,000 away from being able to hit the goal. And obviously, we should just blow past that. There's no reason we can't do that. The second step is from here, basically until the campaign is over, we want people to call the governor every week. So every week, just put it on your calendar, call the governor's office. And we want to have increasing numbers of people, like hundreds of phone calls, going into the gentleman's office to just understand that we're watching him. And then the final thing, we've got a grab bag of tactics for people giving verbal testimony at online CPUC meetings. It doesn't take you that much time. You don't have to travel. Letters to the editor, recruiting more organizations into the coalition. If you're one of those social media people, we've got lots to do there to kind of, get out there. We've got a big grab bag, but let me stop my screen share and we can do Q&A.
Thank you very much, Dave. That was great. That was very quick too. So appreciate you packing all that in. I do have some questions and I want to see other questions. So folks, definitely pop them in there, please, in the chat. Let's see. The first thing is, I know you mentioned as Dr. Phil was speaking that you wanted to speak about the idea of what's holding community solar back in California and how we could fix that.
Yeah, I perked up when I heard Dr. Phil mention that, because the study that I referenced that shows $120 billion in savings if we just keep rooftop solar growing with batteries and integrate it with large scale, that study actually is, well, I kept it simple, but it's both growing rooftop solar and community solar. And you need both to kind of get yourself to kind of that sort of scale. Now, California has almost no community solar. Now, it has a community solar law, and it has a set of rules about how you can do a community solar development, but we have almost no community solar. And the reason why is that back when the law was passed a couple of years ago, the utility, and we were part of the coalition that was helping to pass it, the utilities convinced the legislature to put a poison pill in there that basically instructed the CPUC to kind of roll it out in a way where the economics would just never work. And so I'm giving you the simple version of it. And so as a result, no one's ever been able to really propose a project that would pencil out. We could just fix that poison pill in the legislature. Then we could go back to the CPUC with the political mandate to basically get that off the ground. And then I think we're off to the races. And I think this is important because I think there's a lot of rooftops we can get the solar on. But in the end, there's going to be a lot of people who just won't be able to get the solar on the rooftops. We're not going to be able to convince every single landlord to do it. There's going to be homes that have too much shade, whatever. There's going to be reasons. But there's going to be places close in where you can develop an array of 100 panels or more, parking lots and structures, churches, that really just open up the opportunity for community ownership. Could I basically buy or lease 3 panels, on the other side of town, and then get all of the direct bill savings and even net metering credits from that? It makes total sense to structure that, and yet the utilities have basically scuttlebutted that. So, the way we kind of think about this kind of campaign is we got to save net metering, because none of this works without net metering. And then what I would love, like the best case scenario, would be we kill it in February, we win on net metering, and then we go back as coalition to the legislature and go, now let's fix community solar. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. But so that I just wanted to mention, like, community solar is awesome, and that's the thing that's holding it back right now.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we may have confused our audience a little bit here. When Dr. Phil came on to give his talk, he's talking about local solar. He's using the term community solar, but in many circles, community solars or community solar farm is talking about individuals investing in parts. So you break that giant array up and people buy a share of that or own a parcel within that larger thing. And it's a great way also, depending on how you model it, you don't necessarily have to go buy 30 all at once, because that's a huge investment, right? That's for rich people that have big savings. But you could potentially make it so that people buy a share of that. And so you don't necessarily even have to buy a panel. What you're buying is shares of that. And you can, over time, start to invest and you have broader ownership of that. And then I think one of the tricky parts, though, there is, Dave, is do they pay money back to you? Or typically what happens is it comes off your bill, right? So it's, okay, I generated that many kilowatt hours over the last month, so you need to credit me that on my bill and usage. So we're still talking about having SDG&E as our biller, do that calculation for us, but it works other places.
Yeah, that's preferable. I mean, on-bill financing, just financing the whole thing through the bill, because you're already getting the bill. And we're not, there's some people that are going to want to go off grid. We're not going to stop them. We're not going to discourage them. But most of us are going to stay on the grid, and we already have a bill, and so it's basically a mechanism by which a lot of these kind of financial transactions could happen, and especially for people who have poor credit and other kinds of things. Both the financing and the administration, it's intuitive that at least people would have the option of doing it through the existing mechanism, and that's the way it ought to work. And then the utilities are just made a proper mess of it. Just one thing I wanted to just add, just as a point of clarification, is if you are buying the solar system, 20 panels, 15, 20, 30 panels, yeah, that's a cash outlay, and only people that have the cash or can finance the cash. So that's already a segment of society that doesn't represent most people. But people can get into a 20 array, 30 array kind of thing without any cash, because there's a lot of really good now financing instruments where you can do like a power purchasing agreement, where the solar company owns and operates the panels. You're essentially giving up your rooftop, and then they essentially become your second utility. And typically these arrangements, you pay a fixed monthly charge to them for the energy that you generate. And that fixed monthly charge is lower than what you'd be paying the utility. And then it stays fixed over time or doesn't go up as much. So even over time, you end up saving. And so that is essentially like the way that solar is getting to the working class, is through leases and power purchasing agreements, much in the same way that like we just started leasing an EV. That EV, there's no way we were ever going to pay cash or even do a loan for it. It's just too much money. I've never bought a car for anything less than $8,000. But the lease is sort of a way for people in the middle class to own a little bit of the future. So I just want to, the financing is getting very, very good. And it's one thing that's allowing people to have like pretty sweet arrays with no cash down.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. And I mean, one thing we didn't really discuss here was that the reason why people are willing to go out and invest in these solar developments is because you do pay up front, and you do have to make your deals with folks. But over time, these things pay themselves off, and then they are a free money machine. And so I think most of us here kind of understand that, but we haven't discussed it at all tonight in that respect. And I think it's worth saying that they are that rare beast that doesn't require a lot of maintenance, but over time, suddenly it gets to pay off, and then it's just it's generating cash. And so it's important for us to keep that availability for folks to make that investment for their homes. So I appreciate that. Can you go back and explain a little bit about I know that we don't want to give too much time to the IOUs proposition for what they think net metering should be. But one of the things that was a little confusing on that slide, it was showing like 90 or 80 some dollars per month from SDG&E, and then lower rates for other IOUs. Did you get a clear explanation as to why there's major differences in the monthly harsh fee that they're proposing?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is just each utility has a different rate structure and is sort of starting from a different baseline in terms of their costs, that they're trying to recoup. And it's not like they just make this number up. They show calculations. And in fact, we have some materials that kind of allow you to look into their calculations and kind of see how they get to their numbers. So it just so happens SDG&E, you folks have the good fortune of having basically the most expensive electricity in the state. So the baseline is just higher. And Edison's electricity is the lowest in the state. So not surprisingly, the rate, the monthly penalty fee is just lower. And so that's the simplest version. Is just the baselines are kind of starting from just how high is electricity costs. And obviously, I mean, even a $30 monthly fee or a $20 monthly fee, frankly, even a $10 one would discourage people from going solar. Like what we found is that like very small changes to net metering around the country cause markets to collapse. And so, one thing I just want to say that is like, I'm giving you they're starting with some eye-popping numbers, I think, to kind of make it seem like if the CPUC put a $20 fixed charge on the table, that would seem like a good compromise. No fixed charge is a good idea. There's no reason to do it. But so, Carl, that explains the difference in why the utilities fixed charges are different.
Okay, thank you. Do you know what the solar adoption percentage is per IOU? In other words, do we have a much higher percentage here at SDG&E territory than, say, Southern California Edison?
I don't know what it is by IOU. Statewide, it's about 9%, penetration by ratepayer. I'm going to get out of my skis and just go like the places in the parts of the country that have the highest solar penetration per capita is definitely San Diego County is one of them. Fresno County is actually the highest. The lowest is an area right around San Francisco. So, politics does not have anything to do really with solar adoptions. Or maybe it does, but it might be inverse, in fact. But I don't know by IOU. Maybe once upon a time I did, but I would have to be I'd be using my fuzzy brain.
Okay, Dave, I'm going to go a tough place because I came into the net metering conversation as a person that works with Sierra Club, works for them. And you probably know our position on net metering was a little bit nuanced and not nearly in your camp, not in the IOU camp, somewhere split down the middle. But let's talk a little bit about the concerns that people voice for equity. And I think that argument, I'm happy to have you dispel it here, but like that argument that the IOUs make that we can't keep paying this gift fee of net metering, you got to let us take it away because it's making us pass on all the costs to the remaining customers who are not solar. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your position is on that?
Yeah, all the evidence is that IOU argument is nonsense. And let me just give me a second. I'm going to give the simple version, but I'm going to drop the extremely in-depth version of how it's nonsense in the chat. Kind of like the deep dive reading. Let me just drop it in there, and then I will speak English. Okay, so that's the deep dive, how it's nonsense. And it's nonsense because we've dug into their materials. We've dug into the calculator, the computer model, all that stuff. And the way they get their cost shift number is basically 3 different accounting tricks that they use. And the root of the accounting trick is essentially to pretend like, just basically assume that fixed costs are fixed, that they don't change. But like I was saying in the presentation, the actual evidence is that the fixed costs are not fixed, that in fact they go down. And they go down, in very profound ways. And the more you put rooftop solar and batteries onto the grid, then those savings are so big that it's the other way around, that rooftop solar is actually, the cost shift is happening the other way, that rooftop solar users are paying more. And, but they do all kinds of math to basically make that go away. And then they do some other things that we outline in this white paper. And and then the interesting thing about the study that I mentioned, the $120 billion savings study, I think this is the most profound part of it, is that study just looked at all the costs over the next 30 years. It didn't say who is paying. So it didn't say ratepayer funded costs versus general fund versus shareholders versus rooftop solar because it's a private investment. It didn't say any of that. It just said the costs. And so what it implies is that even if you socialized all of the costs of installing rooftop solar and had that funded essentially by ratepayers, like literally made it free, it would still be $120 billion of savings as opposed to just doing all large scale. And so what it suggests, and yet of course we know that a good chunk of rooftop solar investment, most of it it's essentially a public-private partnership. Most of it is private capital. So in fact, it underestimates the savings. So then and by the way, before we talk about Sierra Club, so NRDC is really the problem when it comes to the environmental group, but that's been the case for like 20 years. If you look at anything about NRDC's history, they have always been strategically allied with the utilities. Their co-founder, became the CEO of Edison International. It's like baked into their DNA. So we can talk about NRDC. Sierra Club, I don't actually think is nefarious. I think they're just misguided. misguided. We had a whole meeting with their policy people, including the Earth Justice folks that wrote their proposal. And what it appears to be, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to give offense.
Okay.
I'm just giving you, I'm just being straight with you.
No, I want to hear it. Yeah.
There's basically 3 lawyers who work in the national office who just believe that the computer model that the CPUC is relying on is fine. And whenever that our guys have gone to them and said, this computer model is screwed up, here's all the ways it's screwed up. And by the way, take a look at what Dr. Clack did when you actually use big data and more data points to kind of really have a refined picture of how solar and batteries integrates with the grid. In fact, you see these tremendous savings, and we've seen this already in 2018 and 2019 and blah, blah, blah. They just go, yeah, we don't believe that. And then even more so when the solar industry folks have gone to them and said, not only is this the actual thing, but we're telling you your proposal will cause the market to contract in really big ways. They just go, yeah, it won't. And so I don't know what to tell you other than a couple of lawyers at the Sierra Club, sort of have their own idea of this whole thing and that in theory, somehow it works in a lab, but aren't really very curious, to kind of see what's actually happening out in the wild. Anyone who I've ever talked to at the Sierra Club on the grassroots end, this is kind of, there's a bit of a divide, and I'm not trying to make trouble. It's just, that's my observation. So the thing I had to say to the Sierra Club is the guy that's coordinating this campaign was going, you guys are a headwind. You're not NRDC. I don't believe you're acting in a nefarious way like NRDC. I think you actually are doing this with good intentions, but you're operating under some very severe hubris right now, and you're a problem. And it's really weird that the group that stopped the damming at the Grand Canyon would then be kind of trying to nickel and dime rooftop solar at a time when we need to be accelerating every little clean electron we could possibly get on the grid. And so we just agreed to disagree.
Yeah, I think we eventually got on the right side of Elena Gonzalez's bill, but let's move on.
Yes.
I appreciate it. It's good, the healthy discussion, because we need to all get together on this, and we absolutely can't stop our forward momentum on the solar adoption that we have. So we have to find ways to do that. And then in that regard, do you know much about SOMA? Do you want to talk a little bit tonight, if you do, about SOMA? Because I'm not sure if folks on the call know a lot about it.
Yeah, I love SOMA. SOMA is so cool. Let me put something else into the chat if you'll let me do that. Is so we have this infographic that is kind of like the path to getting solar into the hands of millions of working class people. And what it does is it puts the net metering fight into context. If you think of net metering as the foundation of the whole thing, like you got to have net metering for this stuff to work. But California has built a couple of other policies on top of net metering to basically leverage what's great about net metering to really help to kind of get solar into the hands of working communities and renters and that kind of thing. And so SOMA is one of those programs. It's basically a subsidy. So if you own a multifamily development of some sort, either you're a developer or you're a landlord or something like that, you own the building and you want to do solar. And if enough people in your property or properties qualify as low income, or happen to be located in a part of the state that fits some kind of census tract that the state defines, then when you do your solar, you can get an extra subsidy to buy down the cost, and that's what the SOMA program is. It's totally underutilized right now, but it's increasing. There's too much bureaucracy. So one of the things we're trying to do is kind of like get that bureaucracy out of the way. But it is happening, and a lot of the projects I showed you, some of them are SOMA projects where they got that extra subsidy. The thing that we would love, and the other thing that SOMA leverages besides this kind of straight up subsidy, is something called virtual net metering, which will allow me to just describe that. Because you might be asking, okay, that's great. So the landlords put the solar on the building. The SOMA subsidy helped buy down the price, further incentivizing the landlord to do it. Now it's reducing the energy use, whatever, but how is that benefiting the renters? So this is where virtual net metering comes in. So what it allows is basically the property owner send the utility basically a spreadsheet that says divide the bill savings up. Let's say there's 20 units. Say divide the bill savings up among 20 units. You could just do it equally, something like that. And once you do that, if the landlord doesn't change that, then no matter who moves in and out of that unit is getting a portion of that solar and the net metering credits as well. So it's like basically a very simple way of doing the math that allows the solar to benefit the renters without having to install 20 different meters or other things that would just basically make that not work. So we should give someone more money. We should cut the bureaucracy out. We should make more multifamily homes eligible for virtual net metering, because right now they keep that pretty narrow. And these would be just a couple of things that we could do to just supercharge solar on multifamily homes, especially those located in working class communities.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I know talking with Monica at Environmental Health Coalition, she said, we love SOMA, but it's hard to get the money to the right people. And so she had the same reaction that cutting the bureaucracy, you know, I don't know if that means that the SOMA money hasn't been spent or if it wasn't a pre-allocated pot, but we certainly hate to see a good program not be implemented because we're just not quite there with getting it to the right people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This is a whole thing. There's a whole group of people that's focused on it. This is another thing. Like, if we could just get the net, like, stop playing defense. There's like a whole bunch of things we'd love to just go back into the legislature, you know, and like just fix a bunch of things and get some more political will. So then we can also go back to the CPUC and deal with the way it's administered and all that kind of BS. You know, there should be grants going to see community-based organizations located in working communities, you know, basically like the way Obamacare paid navigators to go out and knock on doors. And, you know, we should do that. We should be enlisting the, you know, the associations of landlords and figuring out ways to sweeten the pot there so that the whole thing happens. I mean, there's so much we could be doing if we really thought of this as like just a massive, you know, the way we should be thinking about climate change, like mobilize the shit out of the people and tap into their best intentions to be able to solve the problem, right? Like, so the sky's the limit, you know, no pun intended.
So one more nerdy question, and then we're gonna end for the night. But it's a question that I asked Dr. Phil. I'm not sure if you might have a different answer for this, but in trying to understand whether net metering was a subsidy, right, or whether it's just something that we have to consider to be paid by somebody. One of the real reasons that I saw for it being so problematic is the difference between our wholesale prices and our retail prices is just so massive that when the power company comes back and says, you're not paying me enough because I could get this stuff for 3 cents and I'm having to pay you 21 cents and I'll never make up that money, blah, blah, blah. So it makes it, they can make the argument, right, the IOUs, that somehow they're paying you for something that they could get somewhere cheaper. My question to you is, do you feel like if we were to bring either the wholesale up or the retail down and they were closer, that this net metering fight wouldn't be so harsh?
Thing is, they are already close, and here's why. Whenever the utility says, oh, our solar farms, or we can get that energy for 3 cents, and that net metering is 25 cents, here's what they're not telling you. What about those power lines? When you start to add that in, they're really expensive. So then, okay, now you're here. Now what about the cost of the blackouts? Now you're here. Now what about, you know, I mean, you can just add in. Don't even you don't even have to do the kitchen sink of externalities. You know, you just do the reasonable externalities and you're at parity. Like, just instantly you're at parity. So whenever anyone says that, all you have to do is just kind of come at them on the long distance power lines alone, throw in the blackouts. In 2019, those blackouts, it was found, cost the economy $150 billion. Okay, like, there's real money that's in that whole thing. But then it's also just back to, like, I think from a climate change standpoint, you can't, like, there is not enough permittable open space that you can easily develop without just a massive land use fight to get to 100% clean energy. So, like, why are we doing this either or? Like, the DG people have never been, I mean, some DG people are doing an either or, and we don't want to have any development out there. I'm not one of them. What I am saying is, like, if we're serious about getting to 100%, we need it all. We need it both. And we should be doing it as aggressively as we can. And we should be maximizing the rooftops so that we don't have to use as much open space, because it is important to protect open space as well. And so, you know, it's wrong factually, it's wrong conceptually if you look at it just even remotely from a climate change perspective. And I think, you know, again, I put the white paper in there because for some of you, you're going to want to do something more than just what seems instinctually right. But that's, you know, that's basically what's going on.
Fantastic, Dave. So thank you so much for all that clearing up. Go ahead, Meryl.
Yeah, I have one final question. I'd like to know, whose brilliant idea was it to pair Dave Rosenfeld with Phil Watts? What an incredible match, and what an unbelievably informative presentation by both of you. Oh, was that Marion's idea? Well, Madam Secretary, do you have anything to say in closing?
Of course, I have things to say. I want to remind everybody that you can save the chat by clicking on those three little dots, and that way you will have access to the different links and whatnot. And I'm really going to beg all of you guys to go and sign that petition. It'll just take you a couple of seconds, and the more names we can get on there, the better we are. And I would also like to extend a thank you to both of our guests. And unfortunately, Phil had to drop out early. But Dave, we really appreciate you being here and all the hard work you do. And to show you that appreciation, we have purchased something for you. And Meryl, do you want to show them? Okay, so what we have done is we have bought you a tree in your honor that is going to be planted in an area that has been burned out by the forest fires here in California. And so it's really cool. So you and your kids can actually go to this website and look up and find your actual tree. So
can we do that? We can find the tree?
Yeah, well, you have to let me get you the certificate and everything, but there's a link there. You'll go on the website and you'll find your specific tree. So yeah,
Thank you. I love it. I love that.
I thought the kids would enjoy it. And plus it's another way to help mitigate the climate crisis, right? So again, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for coming. It was a great event and appreciate all of you. So we'll see you soon then, okay? Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks everybody for all your great questions.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
and for really engaging with our speakers. I appreciate it.